Well, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Adam Attwood. I'm a PhD student here in the Washington State University College of Education, and I teach integrating fine arts into K-8 curriculum here in the College of Education. So today, virtual art museums in K-16 courses. So I'm going to go over a bit of the background of virtual art museums, the Google Cultural Institute and its Google Art Project, for both the elementary, middle school level, as well as assignments that I've adapted for introductory survey college courses, art history and humanities courses. So basically, my guiding question is, a lot of students have a smartphone or have a tablet or have some sort of interactive technology that can access all of the great technologies through the internet. So how can computers and smartphones be used with virtualized art museums in classrooms to make learning more interactive? And virtual art museums is a way to bring the arts from around the world, from many different cultures, right to your own classroom, wherever you may be. All you need is an internet connection and a smartphone or computer to do so. So if any of you are familiar, a few years ago there was a movie, a couple movies that were released on museums. Night at the Museum, and then its sequel, Night at the Museum, Battle of the Smithsonian. So these were ways for trying to really bringing the museum in as a fun place to be for children to learn about art, to learn about artifacts, to learn about other cultures through their material culture from throughout history. And so these movies, they were quite successful. They grossed a lot of money, and they helped to kind of enliven that museum environment through that visual medium. And this got me thinking as well, how do we then bring this to middle school kids? This is where I started with this line of inquiry. So a little bit of background on this. There have been some researchers who have looked at virtual museums as a way to increase student achievement on standardized tests. So a few years ago, Cassidy et al. 2008 did a study on 1,568 fourth graders and above, and what they found is that the experimental group did quite well on standardized tests when they had electronic field trips compared with the control group. Another study found similar results out of the United Kingdom. And there were another study in the United States that found also similar positive results. So I come back then to my guiding question. How can computers and smartphones be used with virtualized art museums to make the classroom more interactive? And this applies to online classes and face-to-face classes. And increasingly now, you're seeing high school students being required to take online classes, in Idaho, for example. And so this applies to the grade school classroom as well as the college classroom. So basically, you take a smartphone, you take a computer, you combine it with the Google Art Project in delineated ways with assignments, and you get an interactive exploration of different cultures through museums, through their material culture. And I'll go through some of the assignments, and then I'll ask you to, I have a half-page handout with a QR code. If you have a smartphone, I invite you to scan that and look through a museum with me in practice and kind of experience that right here. So one of the assignments is this one. So this is a virtual visit to the Palace of Versailles, which Google has virtualized a component of Versailles outside of Paris, France. And you can click on the floor plan, and then you go right into Versailles. It's just like you're standing there. It's been virtualized 360 degrees around, top, bottom, all sides, and you can walk through there, zoom in, just like you're standing there. as close to standing there as you possibly can. So here, it's really on a constructivist model. I just have some basic guiding questions that I ask students to look at. And then they go explore, and then they come back to the group and share what they learned. So, for example, explore 5 rooms and write everything you can think of that denotes King Louis's goal. So, looking at the architecture of Versailles, looking at what art is in Versailles, why did the architects decide to design the rooms the way they did? How does it represent authority? How does it represent prestige, wealth, Renaissance, personal branding? Those concepts throughout art history. And students then, if this is an online class, which this assignment was used for, you then go to the, in the Angel Learning Management System or Instructure Canvas, go to that forum, and then post comments, and then interact with each other based on what you learned from that. This can also be used for the computer lab at middle school or high school as a way to learn about 18th, 19th century culture in Western Europe. You can do the same thing with the museums all over the world. Google has virtualized museums on just about every continent, and it's a great way to get students to talk about other cultures and why they designed the artwork that they did. What were they communicating through the visual medium, through their material culture? And then this is the second assignment, also for online. So it's a PDF that can be posted and then used with a discussion forum. And I just go step by step for how to navigate the virtual museums and then to post comments in Angel. So I start with typing an appropriate word or phrase in the search box. Alternatively, you can click on the orange person icon and go right to all of the museums in a list that have been virtualized. And then here's a floor plan. It'll be on the left. And then it shows you exactly where you're standing in the museum. And then you're in the 360-degree, three-dimensional view. Okay? Just like you're standing there. Then you can click on certain art pieces, get a short curatorial summary. So here's a sample of some of the online student responses from some of my online classes 3 years ago. This was from community college I was teaching at 3 years ago, and this is what students had to say. So in the the discussion forums, I didn't ask students to comment on the assignment itself. I just posted that PDF that you saw there. But what I found, it was really surprising to me, hadn't encountered it before, but students were commenting on the assignment itself and saying how much they enjoyed the process of getting to actually virtually go to a museum in Europe, in China, in India, in Brazil. And so here are some of those comments. I'll just read a couple of them for you. First off, wow, I love the idea of a virtual museum because there is so much one can learn by just observing a work of art, whether it be a painting, an object, or sculpture. And this student here, when I told my husband I was going to take a virtual tour of a museum, we laughed about the idea of a robot that I controlled wandering around a museum, knocking over priceless artifacts and commenting on the artwork in a loud robot voice. Of course, my visit was nothing like that. I was very pleased to see technology put to such good use. The virtual museums are an excellent tool for learning. I love that you can simulate actually being in the museum with the walking around feature. I viewed the National Gallery of Art, Washington, D.C., the Smithsonian American Art Museum, and the White House collection. Okay, and just a few more comments, very similar. The only kind of critical comment I saw students say is that they thought that the, at first is a little bit clunky getting used to the navigation feature, and it may just be your computer or internet's uplink speed. It might be a little bit choppy at times because there's a lot of graphical content that has to be processed. So that was really the only critical comment I heard from students. Just a couple said a little bit clunky to navigate around just with a slow connection. And then here, screenshots from the actual student comments in the, this was using Angel Learning Management System, which we use here at WSU as well. And I just said to post 150 words or so, and I was getting these long, detailed posts from students about what they were learning through their virtual museum visits. So just visit one museum. Many went through lots of different museums. They were commenting to each other. So there's a lot of interest from students here in this online course with the Virtual Art Museum project, tour assignment. Okay, so now I'm going to turn to grade school implementation for this and ideas for future application. So here's a prototype online learning space using a free tool called ProtoPage. And it's a good way for using web widgets. And you can actually insert an art museum, virtual art museum as a widget into this online learning space. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop for students to go to. If you don't have access to Angel or Canvas or other similar learning management system, you can use ProtoPage to simulate a contained online learning space at no additional cost. And so here's an example of a virtual art museum widget. And you can have tabs similar to Angel and Canvas. And this is Van Gogh, the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And this one also has audio curatorial summaries. So it's very good in case a student has an individualized education plan in K-12 for audio assistance. So this helps with that as well. And similar to the Google Art Project, it has the a little bit more minimalist floor plan, but it's the same idea. The inside of the museum is virtualized. You can zoom in on the figures, get a curatorial summary. And you virtually go to that museum, but otherwise you might not be able to. And this is on my half-page handout as well. So here's another assignment. This is geared towards middle school and high school for either a humanities block course or a history course, AP, honors, or general education as well. And this has a series of 8 options, and this is available on the portfolio website I listed on the half page. I list all of these example assignments on there if you'd like to access those in full later. So I'll just summarize quickly here. So these are all arts integrated options for how you can integrate the arts into a humanities course. And there's like urban design, for example, students who can use the Paint utility. Like I had a student who wanted to just work with the Microsoft Paint utility and would design these elaborate urban plans. And so it told me, oh, this student might be interested in an urban and regional planning program after high school. And it was a good way for this student to artistically express his interest in designing urban landscapes. And so through my differentiated project options here, the student both did something that he was interested in, which apparently looked like urban design, and did the arts integration project looking at social studies and the dynamics of urban expansion and sustainability. So there's a social studies and arts integrated example there, and this can also be integrated into a ProtoPage online learning space or another online system if the district has that available. Okay, so I'd like to invite you to, if you have a QR scanner app on your smartphone or tablet, go ahead and on that half page, just bring up your QR scanner app, and we can just go ahead and scan that, and then I go to the Google Art project, and now what I have on the screen is what I have on my smartphone. Okay, and so this is the same process for a computer, and Google has optimized it for smartphone use as well. And so this is what it looks like. So here I have the example of the Museum of Decorative Arts in Prague, and it has the person icon and then the museum exploration view as well. So if you don't have access to a computer lab, you can still have students with a smartphone or tablet in your survey college course do the same thing, just right in your classroom for this assignment as well. Okay, so here's a view on a desktop computer or tablet, and again, there's the floor plan on the left, and then the virtual view. So it's like you're standing right in that mezzanine area, as if you were right there. And then there are several featured artifacts in a band on the bottom there as well that you can zoom in on if you'd like to. Okay, so I'll just open it up quickly for questions.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is more, I can see the usefulness of the computer and all those advances in technology. My question is more toward learning. What's the difference between going to the museum and doing the same thing or doing it through the computer and things like that?
Yeah, so one of the advantages, if you can't go physically to the museum, and ideally we would like to take students to the physical museum, but if you can't, one of the advantages of this that still captures most of the learning goals that would be associated with a physical field trip to a museum, through the online medium, one of the things you can do that you might not be able to do as a museum is get right up close to that artwork. And be able to really talk about it loudly too amongst friends and peers, which you might not be able to do in a physical museum as well. Another thing also is that sometimes there's a little bit more information that's readily at your fingertips with the online virtual museum. A little bit more of the curatorial summary might be available right with that artwork in some of them. You can also write the assignments so that students go on a little bit more of a scavenger hunt type of process with the online museum, because they have a lot more time to be able to explore. They're not they don't have to worry about closing hours or anything like that. So they can have a little bit more concentrated thinking time with the art pieces looking through the virtual museum. So it's not a perfect replication of the physical museum, but it gets most of what you would need for those assignments. It's also a good way to encourage them eventually to maybe go to that museum, because what Google has done is they've virtualized usually looks like about 30 to 40% of some of these museums' floor plans. So the rest of it is not accessible through the virtual option. But currently it's a great free way to access museums all around the world and introduce students to cultures from all around the world that they may not otherwise really get to see within the aesthetic environment of the museum. And it's the replication online of that aesthetic environment that can really help students to contemplate on other cultures and their own culture through the material culture. Yeah.
One of the things that seems amazing to me about this whole process is that there are some school districts and schools where there's more funding than in other schools, or they're more able to raise money for field trips to take the students actually to the museum. And this may not be a perfect substitute, but it certainly makes it a lot more possible to bring children to a lot more museums.
Yes, it
So
does. It
it's
helps
really nice.
to it helps move more towards open access and a little bit closer to equitable access as well across districts. Yes.
Are there any other questions in the room, or I'll bring the mic to you?
Thank you. I have a comment and a question. One of the advantages of virtual museum visits that I was reminded of was when you mentioned the Van Gogh Museum, which just reopened after many years of renovation. So students wouldn't have been able to visit it even if their parents or the school had taken them to Europe. So this is really a very good way of compensating for absence, whether it is in their town or in their country or even in the country where the museum is located. But this also reminded me of the difference between the Van Gogh Museum and Night in the Museum, where everything was not only three-dimensional but also moving. And in this regard, I wondered whether you saw any difference in reaction from your students between museum sites where you had only flat two-dimensional exhibits versus three-dimensional or even working models, moving items. Did you notice that their reception was different, or did that translate into their comments?
Thank you. Yeah. You know, the reactions were pretty similar, I would say. And I think it's because a lot of times in a museum, there's a tendency to want to, no running and, to be a little bit more quiet. And in the classroom, when you have this available on computers in the classroom, kids can be loud and talk with each other and be like, "Whoa, look at this painting. What is that?" And they can, discuss with each other and learn from each other as much as from me. So a lot of this can be really student-generated interpretational content, and the interpretation isn't always coming from me. And some of the things I learned from the students, the example from the survey course from the community college in particular was that they came up with interpretations I hadn't even thought about. And had it not been for the Virtual Art Museum project, I may not have learned from my students on those art pieces. For example, I put on that example there, the Versailles one. Student came up with the idea of with the Hall of Mirrors, and in their response they said, I think it'd be really intimidating, something along the lines of, it'd be really intimidating for guests to start at the end of the Hall of Mirrors and then have to walk all the way down this really long corridor to the receiving nobles with all of these, having to look at themselves in these mirrors because they're mirrors, and so the idea was that, there must have been a psychological reason for why Louis' architects designed the Hall of Mirrors this way, as a way to establish the king's authority and making people a little bit more self-conscious in this Hall of Mirrors. It was an interesting interpretation I hadn't really considered before, and that was all generated from students, and that really showed me that they're really tracking this content, really thinking deeply about these things that they might not get from just a static textbook necessarily. So it's a good student-generated, student-centered concept for learning.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from those who have joined us online? No?
Well, thank you very much for having me today. My name is Adam Attwood. I'm a PhD student here in the Washington State University College of Education. and I teach integrating fine arts into K-8 curriculum here in the College of Education. So today, virtual art museums in K-16 courses. So I'm going to go over a bit of the background of virtual art museums, the Google Cultural Institute and its Google Art Project, for both the elementary, middle school level, as well as assignments that I've adapted for introductory survey college courses, art history and humanities courses. So basically, my guiding question is, a lot of students have a smartphone or have a tablet or have some sort of interactive technology that can. So if any of you are familiar, a few years ago there was a movie, a couple movies that were released on museums. Night at the Museum, and then its sequel, Night at the Museum, Battle of the Smithsonian. So these were ways for trying to really bringing the museum in as a fun place to be for children to learn about art, to learn about artifacts, to learn about other cultures through their material culture from throughout history. And so these movies, they were quite successful. They grossed a lot of money, and they helped to kind of enliven that museum environment through that visual medium. And this got me thinking as well, how do we then bring this to middle school kids? This is where I started with this line of inquiry. So a little bit of background on this. There have been some researchers who have looked at virtual museums as a way to access all of the great technologies through the internet. So how can computers and smartphones be used with virtualized art museums in classrooms to make learning more interactive? And virtual art museums is a way to bring the arts from around the world, from many different cultures, right to your own classroom, wherever you may be. All you need is an internet connection and a smartphone or computer to do so.